Hey, it's Matthew from That's Matthew, and you're watching Disney Channel. I've always wanted to do that. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of That's So Matthew. Today, I am so excited to have an awesome guest here with me today. Say hi and introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Darasimi and I have a podcast of my own. It's called Just For That, where I discuss kind of controversial topics and kind of other things as well, and like social things and stuff like that. So I'm really excited to be on this podcast. So thank you for having me.
Of course, we did our collab about 2 months ago over on your show, and we talked about controversial Disney Channel episodes, which was honestly a blast for me because, as you guys know, I love Disney Channel. I have a whole podcast that you're listening to right now. So it was so great to talk with you and mix our shows, your controversial topics, and Disney Channel together. And I will make sure to link that episode that we did together in the show notes below. But that was honestly just a blast. So I'm really excited to have you here today.
Thank you too. That was really fun.
So today we are talking about the Disney Channel original movie, The Color of Friendship, which is a very, honestly, groundbreaking Disney Channel original movie, in my opinion. At this time, 21 years ago, when the movie came out, I feel like Disney Channel hadn't really covered a topic as mature and big as this. This movie tackles more of like I would say, talking about racial bias and viewpoints, and it even premiered during Black History Month, which I think is a very big step for Disney. And I almost wish that they kind of continued to go in that direction, even to today, but they kind of didn't. And I think we'll kind of talk about that and how this movie did with tackling such a big issue.
Yeah, definitely. What's crazy is I've heard of this movie before, but I actually didn't watch it up until recently. And I think when I first heard about it, I didn't realize that it was talking specifically about like apartheid in South Africa. And like you said, that's like a big thing for like Disney to talk about. And I was like, oh, okay, that's really good. They were discussing this at that time, and I just think that it was important to kind of like tell that story because sometimes I feel like people may like, of course, people like know about it, but I think um maybe like, since like a lot of like younger people watch Disney, I feel like younger people didn't know much about it. So, like you said, I think it was a good thing that they did that, and it was a good step in the right direction. But yeah,
Yes. I think another thing about this movie is it's not like your typical like storyline. Like, I will be honest, I had not seen this one in quite some time, but I know when I was little, when I watched this, it was just kind of a little different take because we have a congressman and his family who are going to be taking in someone from South Africa. So they're expecting someone that is of color, and they end up getting Marie, who is white, and she's basically the opposite of what they were expecting. And I feel like Marie is kind of like adjusting to the situation. She didn't really know what she was getting into, and she kind of had to learn to see beyond the color and their differences to get along and like have like, a Disney Channel happy ending at the end.
yeah, definitely, because it's like as you're saying, they didn't expect to receive a white student during this foreign exchange thing, and then she also didn't expect to be going into a black family, like because in the like beginning when she met them at the airport, she thought that they were like the servants, I guess, because she was like talking about her bags, like, oh, like you can go and get my bags and this and that, and then she was saying like when even when she met the congressman who was black, she was like surprised because she thought that it was going to be a white family. So yeah, it kind of shows how they both kind of assumed like one thing, but it happened to be the complete opposite. So
Yeah, and I think that's a super important part of the message. So, just a brief overview before we really get into things. This movie, like I said, came out in 2000 on February 5th, 2000, and is directed by Kevin Hooks and written by Peter Qualls, and is based off of two separate instances where the Delums family hosted a white South African teenage girl as an exchange student, and they were combined into this story for the film. So it is based off of a true story, and I honestly, I think that makes this movie even more stronger to have that influence of like real life, like true life, because on Disney Channel, they're always like making everything like picture perfect, movie perfect,
Mhm.
and to have like that instance of tackling this such big issue based off of a true story, I think that's what makes this DCOM stand out from like the rest of them.
Yeah, definitely. Because, another thing is that when watching it, I didn't realize that it was based on a true story until I kind of like finished it. Then I went to go and do some research. I was like, oh, okay, that's actually pretty cool because they're taking this thing that really happened and they're putting it out there so that people can know like what was going on and how this happened or whatever. And I think that it's important that we realize that even though like because technically in this movie at the end of it, I mean, sure, she got to like stay for how long she was actually supposed to in the first place, but it wasn't necessarily a full happy ending because like until like years later, because at that time, since it was around 1977 when the movie was based in, um apartheid didn't actually like end until around like 1994 or so. And so although they got to like I think the part where it's like happy ending is really just the fact that Mario herself realized that the way she was kind of taught and brought up was like not exactly correct, and that we're all like human and she doesn't have to be like um prejudiced against people of color. So
Definitely. So honestly, I think we should just start off with our very first character, which is Piper Delums. So she is played by Shadia Simmons. I hope I'm saying that correctly. And I just want to talk about Piper and her family. Just they are a congresswoman or a congressman family, excuse me. And so they are focusing on like the real world issues. This does take place in Washington, D.C. We see lots of external shots. Fun fact, at the time of recording, I will actually be going to DC in 2 days, well,
oh,
after
cool.
recording. So that's super cool. But this does take place there. And so they are focused on like the African inequality, and he's working towards fixing that because that's what he's doing. And that's one of the bills I'm assuming that he's trying to work on. So he wants to kind of like they want to take an interest in Africa and the different nations. And so Piper really, really wants to host an African exchange student, like we said. So they are thinking that they're going to be able to get a different way of life from someone else who is also a person of color. However, they are getting Marie, who is, she's, when you think of Africa, unfortunately, I feel like there's just like the stereotype of like you just see like outdoor like animals roaming. Like it's just not, I feel like how Africa is. So then they get her who is she's basically rich, and she has kind of lived her whole life in this mansion, and she, like you said, assumes that this family is servants. So there's just this whole thing, and I feel like I want to just like shout out Piper. And the reason I think I liked her so much is because I feel like she was open to this exchange student. And I feel like that's something like that's a huge step, like bringing someone into your house and into your family for a certain amount of time when you don't really know much about them. You're assuming that you're gonna like see eye to eye with them, maybe get a different perspective. And they ended up not really getting along for a part of it. And so I feel like that kind of just makes everything work so much better because it wasn't supposed to be like this happy story. We do have the tension, we do have the real world issues, like I said. And Piper, I think, was probably my favorite character in the movie. Uh, but what did you think about her?
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Piper was my favorite because she just seemed like okay. So obviously, like we said before, she didn't exactly expect for the foreign exchange student to be white either. But even though she realized that she wasn't completely opposed to the idea, she was going to welcome her in, like because she still just wanted the chance to like kind of have a sister since she only had brothers and things like that. So I think that that part, and the fact that also that she was like, I believe she was 13, I think they said, and she seemed really educated for that age, and like she seemed like really um like intellectual, and like she knew about things of the world, and she wasn't just kind of like closed off into like one little bubble of like knowing only a few things about like America or something like that. So I think that that was really good as well. And I also remember like how in the beginning of the movie when she was trying to convince her parents of this in the first place, and the reason her dad like said yes was because he was saying how maybe that could like help with the culture divide between Black Africans and Black Americans. And I think that that was like what the dad was thinking like going into it, and that's so that's like what kind of convinced him to say yes. And then when it ended up being Mari, I guess like that's why it maybe seemed as if like, oh well, this the reason I said yes at first was it isn't exactly what's going to happen. But anyways, I think that she was Piper was absolutely amazing. I think that she was very smart. I think that she tried her best to like welcome in Mari and like be nice to her anyways. So yeah, I think she was definitely my favorite character as well.
Yes. And another thing I just want to talk about is having this representation of having all of these African American actors and actresses portraying these characters who are at this time, this does take place in the 70s. So at this point, it's not a very like widespread, there's not widespread racial acceptance in America. I mean, is there really right now? A debate arguable, but it was just something. I think also the fact that this does take place in the 1970s and the story is being told 30 years later, that it makes it almost more special because it is like a period piece in that sense. And to have Piper be so honestly accepting is, I think, what makes this movie. And I mean, I just want to quickly chat about the tagline that they had on the poster when this movie came out. So it's called The Color of Friendship. And so the tagline is look beyond black and white and you'll find the color of friendship.
Mm.
I can't like put my finger on it, but to me, that tagline is just a little cheesy.
Yeah, kind of is,
it,
but
it it's funny. I think it's 2000s Disney. I don't know like what else we were expecting. Uh, but our next character, of course, is the exchange student Marie. So, like I said, she is kind of like a spoiled, like white South African. She does live in this mansion. She has a little brother, and they have just kind of benefited from the system, and they never really like talk about like their issues. Like they don't see the problem with it, I guess. So you
yeah.
have her father who is a policeman, and he actually um has just there's a man has just been captured, and he is so excited. And they have a maid. So like you said, we Marie thinks that the family is like all maids and servants. Uh, but is so like I think racially like blind. Like she doesn't really like see that, but she's still her best friend. But it's just the whole system isn't working in her favor per se. The maid being, of course, because you have the family who's clearly benefiting from that. But to me, I feel like I don't have this problem with Marie. It's more that she isn't like fully aware of her surroundings. Like she is still benefiting her family from that system, and they don't really question it or really talk about that. So I can't blame her, but like also I do wish that maybe she was more like aware going into it. But I feel like it made for like a great like character development in time.
I don't know. I suppose it's not her fault, but truthfully, I did not like her up until like 45 minutes into the movie, maybe even 50 minutes, maybe even an hour. I don't know. But like she really got on my nerves because I was thinking like, okay, so I understand that she doesn't really completely uh like comprehend the fact that this place that she's in now is not South Africa, and that here like you don't have like, or at least anymore, there aren't any laws about like blacks and whites going into the same place or anything like that. But I just feel like the way she reacted like in the beginning was really rude because she okay, like let's say she okay, like obviously she was surprised, but she just like ran upstairs in the stranger's house and like didn't even properly like say anything to them and then locked herself in someone else's room for like over a day. And I was like, that like despite the fact that you're upset right now, I feel like that's really just like messed up because I mean, like I guess I understand, but I just feel like um she could have reacted differently and like could have properly addressed like she could have properly addressed that in like another way. So that's why I kind of didn't really like her. And then I even feel like when I did start liking her and like when her and Piper like started becoming friends, I guess, then when she said something about like Piper's school, she was like, "Oh, I'm going to a Bantu school," just like, "Oh, I'm going to like a black school or whatever." I was just thinking like, but okay, so yeah, now you're friends with Piper or whatever, and you're okay with her and you like her, but that also, to me, it seems like she's kind of like in a way picking and choosing the people that she's going to be racially biased towards. Like, oh, okay, so this family is fine, but I'm still not sure about like other black people or something like that. And I mean, I guess it takes time, being that that's just the way that she was brought up, and that's the way that she grew up. But it just kind of like annoyed me, I guess, and also because I think in the beginning I thought that she would be more understanding of like black people in general because of her maid at her house. What's her name? The
Flora.
Yes, Flora. Sorry, I forgot for a second. Yeah, Flora. And like how they were really close. So I thought that she was like more understanding and stuff. And then when she got to America and I realized like her reaction, I was like, oh, okay, so it just seems like it's excuse me, it just seems like it's kind of like some people that she's okay with. So that's why I didn't really like her that much. But at the same time, I do understand that it's kind of like ingrained in her because of the way she's grown up. So she didn't really know anything else from that. And like you said that when you said like she's racially blind, it's like she doesn't even realize that she is like being biased and she doesn't even see it. So I think that was kind of like I guess the problem I had with her. But yeah.
I totally get that. And I feel like I agree. I mean, I do agree because she does come in, and I feel like we said, she does have this like misconstructed, like opinion of what she's going into, and it wasn't what she was expecting, and she seemed really like dissatisfied in that sense, you know.
Mhm.
And for her to like find, and you said she's like okay with certain people, but not okay with others, and it just kind of does bring up the question of like, where does she really lie? Like, is she really okay with them? Is she just kind of putting on this act? So I totally feel you on that one. But I think that even for Disney Channel, I think her character was really complex in that sense of character development. And I just have to give them props for that because this was not an easy story to tell. And I feel like even though it's not 100% perfect, I think for 2000, it was really good.
Yeah, I guess I agree with that. Like you said, Disney taking that step to like portray a movie like this, I think that was really good. So
Yeah. So the next character that I kind of want to talk about is the dad, who is the congressman. So he does kind of put, he's also, I would say, very like miseducated in terms of that racial inequality between the two countries. And so he just doesn't like the system and the oppression of the African Americans that is going on in the South of Africans and everything. So I think that kind of brings up the question of like, does this, he, for being like an American congressman, like what kind of actions is he taking? And I feel like it was really great for him to bring in this exchange student to kind of see like what was going on in a sense. So I feel like he's kind of like an underrated character, but I definitely wouldn't say that he's like my favorite character, if that makes sense.
yeah, I agree. I think I didn't really. It's not like I didn't like him at first. I just didn't really like. Um, it wasn't like oh this is probably like my favorite character or anything. But I think towards the end when he became a bit more like because at first he really did not want to welcome in Mari, and I think when I saw later on when he was like I think maybe like what okay yeah the scene where he gave her the book Roots, I think at that point I was like, oh, okay, he's being like more welcoming, and I think that was when I guess I was like, okay, he's not too bad. But in the beginning, I don't think I really liked his reaction to it. At the same time, I understood because like in a way, like he felt as if it was going against like the things that he was standing for. But yeah, so I think I liked him better towards the end, I guess.
Yes, me too. And then another character that I just kind of want to talk about. So is the rest of the family kind of like in general of the Delums family. We don't really have to break them down one by one because they're not like super major players of the movie. But I think it was also great for them to kind of still be open and accepting, even though you had Marie, uh, who wasn't in accepting of them at first. I feel like they kind of were still being really nice to her, even with that, like those misconstructed notions that they had about each other. And so they continue to grow close along the way, and they continue to grow close and they become good friends. And she learns to live along with them and she has a better understanding of their life. So I feel like I kind of have to give like major props to them in that sense.
Yeah, definitely. It just kind of shows that they both like tried, and I think that it shows that they put in effort, so it's good.
Yeah. And then the last character that I think I want to talk about in depth is their maid Flora, who kind of helps the exchange student Marie help kind of figure out what is kind of going on. She is her best friend, and that she's not really satisfied with her life. She's very kind, very friendly. She's very just, I would say, very just understanding towards the family, even though there are some of those, like you said, that racial blindness to the point where she doesn't really see like what she's doing until she comes into America and has those constructed notions, if that makes sense.
Mhm. I think so as well. I think that she was incredibly like I really did like her because I felt like with her that even though oh so sorry about that even when Mari got back to South Africa, I felt like she could, even though like her parents think a certain way, I kind of felt like like Flora, would kind of be the one to like help her to continue on with the way that all people are equal. So I really liked Flora as well.
Yes, and I feel like that's another thing that we like in this movie, like the idea of equality is very like talked about, thrown around. And it's very just interesting to me for the fact that it was Disney Channel. Like it doesn't, I'm going to be honest, it doesn't really even feel like Disney Channel in the sense of the way that they're like handling things, if that makes sense. It just feels a little bit, I think, mature for Disney, but like I'm not like mad about that.
No, definitely because even when I kind of started like I said before, when watching it, I obviously knew that it was like two different friends from like different backgrounds, but I didn't really realize that it was talking about like apartheid or anything like that. So when I realized that, I was like, oh, okay, like Disney Channel is doing this. Like that's actually pretty good and pretty cool. And like you said, mature because typically I feel like Disney kind of like I guess hides like the real world problem stuff. But I think with this, it was just like raw and they didn't try to like cover anything up or anything like that. So I think that's really good.
I do too. And I feel like it's not, I wouldn't say that they like hide it. I just feel like they don't take on the issues. Like, I feel like we have not seen like enough of that racial representation. Like, we just had our first DCOM with an Indian American, like center, storyline just in 2021. So this movie came out 21 years ago for like that idea. So I think it is so interesting to kind of see how everything does play out in that sense.
Yeah,
Like
definitely.
in this day and age, we're still working on that representation, and that it's not perfect for sure, but I think this was definitely a step, like we said. So I do want to get into the plot a little bit more and kind of just break down some of the things that happened in the movie. on a deeper level, starting off from the beginning, like I said, we have Piper, who lives in Washington, D.C., with her congressman father. He, like we said, is against the system that kind of lifts up people like Marie. And then you have her mother and the two twin brothers, Brandon and Eric. And then she has kind of been taking in this interest. And really, she wants to kind of get to know like what's going on and wants to host an exchange student, which I think is honestly so cool uh, to kind of take on this deeper meaning in that sense. So from at this point, I was already really shocked with how like interested I was in the movie for Disney. And like you said, like it's so mature, but it felt right in that sense for her to just kind of be like, I want to learn more. I don't feel like I know enough. I really would be interested in having this exchange student.
Yeah, definitely. I think when she like said those things, that's when I was like, excuse me, it's like, oh, okay, this girl's really like she wants to be more educated. She wants to educate herself on matters like this, and I think that that's incredibly cool. And I also kind of related to that because I remember, I think like a few years ago or something, I was talking to my parents about how I wanted to have like a foreign exchange student in our house as well because I thought that that would be like a good chance to like learn more about like, another culture and like something like that. So I think that that was incredibly mature for her.
Yes, I agree. So now we kind of see Marie, or I feel like I'm saying that wrong every time. Marie, just like Mari.
I don't know. I think it's Mari because I just going based off how they said it, but I don't know.
I know. I always have like such a hard time like with names in these DCOMs. So I'm just gonna Mari. I feel like it just make like with the two E's at the end, it makes me want to like say like the longer E, but I'm just gonna say Mari. There we go.
Yeah, what you mean.
So she is a white South African, like I said, and she has been living in a kind of rich life, a very comfortable lifestyle with her parents and her little brother who benefit from this system that the family, or I should say, at least the congressman, is against. They don't really question it. It's kind of just how they live their life, you know? And I feel like that's another thing, like even here in America, that just naturally happens. It just people don't really question what's going on and like the morality behind it all. And to kind of see that kind of being talked about, even in the early 2000s, to kind of have that going on, I was really impressed at this point of the movie already. And we were like just a couple minutes in.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely. I agree.
So from here, things start kind of picking up a little bit when we kind of be introduced to the maid, and we talk a little bit about how she is kind of helping uh Mari and everything. And so she wants to kind of they kind of say, I guess I didn't really know what the word was, so I kind of looked up like maybe like racial harmony, where they kind of just live together, and she doesn't really understand it at the time. And so she wants to study in America. So her father like says that she can, but he doesn't really think that she's going to be very happy there. He thinks that she's not going to enjoy her time there and kind of just thinks that she's going to be back home in no time, which I also thought was super interesting because we have these two different perspectives coming from the two main characters, and they both like one thinks the other thing. And so I thought that just having that contrasting opinion was like super important already to kind of like set them up to like meet each other.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And even like how you said like that the dad thought that she'd be back home in like no time. I also thought that was interesting that he just thought like, oh, okay, well this is just like another thing, and I'll just let her go and I'll just say yes, but I expect her to be back home soon. So I thought that was interesting as well.
Yes, I just so far this movie was already impressing me. And now I want to talk about their meeting. So we see them meet each other, and like we said, they are totally confused like about each other's countries. And we don't really you have Mari who doesn't really think that people of color are able to be politicians at the time in America. Even though we there is Congressman Delums, and she is expecting to kind of have a uh different opinion, kind of like they're not going to be white. I feel like that is something that's super interesting to me because I don't know. There's so many like things about here, like to have this misconstructed like racial bias, and it tacks so like they tackle it so well. So when she is brought into the home, like you said, she just locks the door, and she brings her some food, and she's very attitude-ish, like already, like you said, she's not being very nice to the family.
Yeah. And I feel like, so like, if even if you're like not exactly happy with where you are, I feel like you can at least be respectful. But I just think that in the beginning, she was just not being respectful, like locking herself in someone else's room, refusing to eat, and like just not being like they were trying to welcome her in to the house, and like you're in, like you're a guest in someone else's house, and I just feel like the way she went about it wasn't really that good. But I mean, at the same time, I guess I understand that like she was shocked and surprised to see that she wasn't where she was. And another thing that I wanted to bring up about how what I thought was interesting was when Piper and her mom went to the airport and they at first like were like looking at this other person who came off from the plane who was black and looked like a teenager, and she was there like, oh, Mari, and then the girl like kind of like moved on to someone else because they thought that that was her. Then they were like, oh, maybe she's on the wrong plane because they didn't see anyone else who they thought it could be, so they had to go to ask like the guest services or whatever, like, oh, like, was there Mari Bach on this plane? And then the girl behind him was like, oh, I'm Mari Bach. And then they turned around and they're like, oh, that's Mari Bach. Okay, then didn't expect that. So I kind of thought that was interesting because I was wondering how that was going to play out. Because even in the beginning, when they were first showing Piper's family and how she was trying to convince her parents to let her have one, and then they switched to South Africa and showed, excuse me, and they showed Mari's family and how she was trying to convince her dad to let her go to America. I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be interesting. I want to see how this is going to play out because neither of them would expect the other.
Yes, and you're totally right. Like I at this point was like, what is going to happen? And I feel like there was this huge culture shock going into it. And so I feel like everyone at this point is just being judgmental of each other. I feel like everyone does have those misconstrued notions, and it's just kind of a mess. I feel like they are working towards like that kind of like that racial harmony, but they are having those boundaries about one another. And so you want to kind of see where this is going to go. And you see that during her stay, the Dellums family and her start to grow close, and she sees in America these people of different races getting along, and she kind of starts realizing that her and Piper have lots in common. They get along very, very well, but they had to put those differences aside, like you say, like or like at least they said in the tagline, like you if you look beyond black and white, you get the color of friendship. So I feel like it's a really like metaphorical sense, but it was like great to kind of see them start putting their differences aside and start to be friends.
Yeah, I think that was important as well, that they, I guess, like the lines just like looked beyond like the color and they just realized that we can still be friends although we're from different backgrounds and we have like and we've been brought up differently, but we can still get along well. And I think that they, like you said, like they had a lot in common, and it was just kind of easy for them to be friends. Once I think, honestly, I think it was like once Mari opened up and kind of let down her, um, like her shield or shell or whatever, and she, like apologized to them or whatever. And I think that that's when they were easily able to become friends from there.
Yes. And now we are working towards this understanding of the system, which I had to look up how to pronounce again. Apartheid, I believe, is correct. Uh, and she starts realizing, Mari, I should say, what it is like for Black South Africans under that like life, under that system. And so now both characters have that understanding. And
Yeah,
I feel like starting to get that racial harmony that is like being suggested by the movie and the plot, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And I also wanted to, I just remember the scene from the movie where when Piper's mom took the two girls to the mall, and afterwards they were like drinking chocolate shakes or something in like the courtyard, and there was this waiter who was black, and he had accidentally spilled stuff on this white man. And I remember Mari kind of like mumbling to herself. She was like, "Oh, please don't hit him," and that shows that like she was thinking back to the events where her family was eating somewhere in South Africa, and this waiter had dropped or spilled something or whatever on this white man, and he hit him, and then called him this derogatory word. So I think when I saw her say that, I was kind of like, oh, okay, so she realizes that that man hitting him was wrong, and she again over here was telling herself, like she was like thinking like, oh, please don't hit him, but she ended up not hitting him, so that was good. But I think when I kind of saw that, I was like, okay, so she didn't. It's not like I feel like she's starting to like kind of understand and comprehend like, oh yeah, like that wasn't right, and and I think, I guess, even when it did happen, I think she knew that that wasn't right, but she still didn't fully understand that even her own family was like being racist basically.
Yes. And I feel like even in this sense, it kind of like if families or children were watching this movie together at the time, it started allowed them to have those like hard conversations about this like situation of race in America and in South Africa. But now I feel like this is when it starts to get very interesting for the movie. So the guy that the South African policeman was very excited about that he was captured actually dies in very suspicious, confusing circumstances. So it starts mass protests, even at the South African embassy, which is in Washington, D.C. So they some diplomats arrive to this house and they take her uh, just because they want to send her back to South Africa. And so there is a lot going on. He kind of threatens that he would expose them, I guess you could say, for stealing her and being kidnapped from the host family. And it is kind of just very confusing because I feel like Mari doesn't really know what's going on at all. I feel like I was even a little confused at this point.
Yeah, same.
And so she doesn't really know what's happening. And she is kind of uh she's really back to being racially blind, I guess. She doesn't understand the racial struggle that is happening. So she's hurt because Piper starts like being rude to her about it. And I feel like, yes, it wasn't the best thing to be rude, but I feel like it is such a conversation piece that it was a little bit of, in my opinion, a little rude at that point.
Yeah, I agree. I get what like Piper's point, and I get like that she was upset, but I feel like the way she kind of the way she went about it wasn't exactly the best way. But also, I think that with Mari, I feel like the whole embassy stuff, honestly, like how you said, like I was confused. I was like, isn't this low key kidnapping? Because like I don't understand. Like you're just gonna take her, and like even okay, even so, like they were actually from the embassy, yes, but like where exactly? Like I didn't really see them like give like proper proof to like Piper's mom at the time, like oh yeah they are, because it just seemed very like sketchy to me. But like, I mean, of course, like I knew that they were, but I'm saying like if I was like there in real life at that situation, I would kind of be like, oh, well, this is a bit weird. Like these people just came and were like, oh yeah, we're from the embassy, and like we're taking Piper back home or whatever. And I thought that was like that was doing too much, I guess. And also, even when she went to the embassy and they were talking about, I believe his name is Biko, or yeah, Steve Biko, and they were talking about him, and the woman from the embassy, her assistant, was kind of just like feeding these things to Mari, like, oh yeah, like he did kill himself, and that's because he was making too much trouble or something like that. And I think like how you said, she went kind of back to like being racially blind in a way, and like seeing him as a problem, and not because like then when she was talking to Piper and she was like, oh Biko, who cares about him? And it just kind of showed like I feel like how easy it is for her to be blinded by like the real struggles and like stuff like that. So I think that that's kind of sort of what started their little fight there at the end. But yeah, I think that her going there wasn't like luckily her mind got changed again, but her going there in the first place was not very good for her progression in accepting all people.
I very much agree. Like that, this story of acceptance is so widely like interwoven into the story to the where it when that isn't happening on both sides, it does kind of start the fight, like you said. So I kind of more see where she was coming from. So she finally, I should say, Mari finally understands what these fighters and liberation fighters are finally standing for. So they finally make up and they finally have that sense of peace, and that's about it. There is kind of like a little extra scene at the end. They have a little bit of an African pride event in America. The congressman does give a speech. He talks about the bird weaver story, which is actually mentioned before. So it's like kind of like brought back and woven in again. And so that's the same story. And he says that it was told by a new friend from Africa. I wrote that down in my notes because I thought that was like super cool. And
Mhm.
so Mari leaves the United States. She's a very different person, and she's greeted by Flora when she gets home. And I think it is just something super exciting. She kind of, they imply that she is on the side of the Black liberation movement at the end. Flora is very touched and pleased, and then they release the Weaver bird at the end. It's very touching. It felt very natural to me, and it felt like an ending that like wasn't happy, like in that sense of like the usual Disney Channel happy ending, but it worked very well, and I feel like it told the story and it finished it off in a very great way for me. And so I just wanted to know like what you kind of thought about that ending.
Yeah, I think that the ending was rather good. I think that's like both like Mari and like Piper, like they completely were like kind of like I guess the word could be like united, I guess, and kind of like one and like they realized like, oh yeah, like we can be friends despite our differences and things like that. And I would hope that Mari would take back those things that she kind of I guess learned, take that back, and maybe she can even like um teach her parents about it and her brother, and at least her brother anyways, and maybe try to like help them realize and see that like we're all like the same, and like it doesn't necessarily just because they're like have they've been brought up differently or a different background or different ethnicity or different race, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to treat them differently or we have to be completely separate from them. So I think that I did like the ending in that sense. So yeah.
Definitely. So now we have to give this movie a rating to kind of like finish out the episode. So I will go first. So, as much as I really enjoyed the storyline of this movie, I feel like it was very mature for Disney. I thought it was really well done. I don't think that it's like one of my all-time favorites.
Mhm.
But I was thinking probably like a 7.5, maybe an 8. It is good, but it's just not my favorite. And I feel like we kind of talked about there were some small little things that maybe would have made this story better. But for being 2000 and for being Disney Channel and for this really mature sense of plot, I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, same. I think I would actually rate it a 9. Only because I guess like I think for myself, like I really like seeing movies about like those type of like social things and stuff like that. So I think that's why I really enjoyed it. So yeah, I would rate it like a 9 out of 10. And I think that, like you said, like we keep saying like how it was mature for Disney, and I think that that also kind of influences my rating as well. But yeah, I think it was a 9.
Awesome. So I want to thank you so, so much for joining me on today's episode. I had a really fun time. But before we head out, could you just tell my listeners where they can find you, like on Instagram, and where they can check out your podcast?
Yes, of course. So, thank you for having me, and for you guys who want to listen to my podcast on Instagram, I my username is at just with Dara, and you can find my podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Podbay, Breaker, all major podcast platforms, including YouTube and also Anchor as well. So I hope you guys do listen to my podcast, and I hope you enjoy it. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course, I was so glad to connect with you, and we tackled a super interesting decom that is always fun to talk about. Yes. So thank you all so much for checking out this episode of That So Matthew. If you want to follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, all the things, just look up at That So Matthew and you should find me. You can listen to my podcast wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. Check out my website, thatsomatthew.com, for all the fun stuff on there and merch. And I will see you all in another episode again soon. Bye.
Bye.